My wife and I, both in our early 30s, had what seemed like a strong, fulfilling marriage for the past 2 years. Despite our demanding careers and busy schedules filled with meetings, office work, and business trips, we managed to stay connected. Understanding and respect for each other's ambitions were the cornerstones of our relationship. One thing that made life easier was having a driver, mainly for my wife, as she didn't enjoy driving. This arrangement had worked well since our marriage. Our longtime driver was reliable and had become part of our daily routine, but when he unexpectedly passed away, we were forced to look for a replacement. After sifting through agencies and recommendations, we hired a new driver, a 27-year-old with solid references and a professional demeanor. Although he appeared competent, a feeling of unease settled over me. I trusted my wife implicitly, but his youth and appearance stirred an insecurity I hadn't anticipated. Still, I decided to push those thoughts aside and let trust prevail. In the beginning, everything seemed normal. My wife was happy with the new driver's work, and he integrated into our routine seamlessly. My initial apprehensions began to subside as he showed himself to be diligent and respectful. But after a few weeks, I noticed subtle changes in my wife's behavior. Her outings began to last longer, and she seemed more engaged when speaking about her day, often mentioning moments involving the driver. At first, I brushed it off, attributing it to her general friendliness and our busy schedules. As weeks turned into months, I started to notice that my wife's late nights and outings were becoming more frequent. Her schedule, which was once predictable, now seemed erratic. When I asked, she assured me that her workload had increased and there was nothing to worry about. I tried to take her at her word, convincing myself that it was just the ebb and flow of a demanding job. Still, the feeling of unease crept back, refusing to be ignored. She often mentioned how helpful the new driver was, recounting stories about his patience or times he'd gone out of his way to assist her. One evening, she told me about how he stayed late when she was caught up at work, waiting without complaint until she was ready to go home. Another time, she spoke of feeling unwell and how he had immediately come to take her to the hospital on his day off. She suggested giving him a raise, which I agreed to without hesitation, trusting her judgment. Yet, these stories, while innocent on the surface, fed the quiet doubt I had pushed down. Then came the night that confirmed my worst fears. I had been on a business trip scheduled to last a week, but I managed to wrap things up early and returned home 2 days ahead of schedule, eager to surprise her. It was late when I arrived, but I was excited and looked forward to spending the weekend together. I planned a special night to reconnect after my travels, ready to make up for lost time. But when I pulled into our driveway, her car wasn't there. It was nearly midnight, which was unusual, as she rarely stayed out that late without letting me know. The driver typically clocked out by 10 p.m., so his absence only deepened the mystery. I questioned the security guard, who confirmed that she had gone out earlier and hadn't yet returned. I instructed him to keep my arrival a secret and went inside, turning off the lights and waiting in the dark. About 30 minutes later, I heard the familiar sound of her car pulling into the driveway. I moved to the window and watched as she stepped out, dressed up as if she'd been to an event. The driver exited the car too, which was odd. He should have left as soon as he dropped her off. Instead, he walked her to the door, and they laughed softly, sharing an intimacy that made my blood boil. I waited in the shadows as she unlocked the front door and pulled him inside. They were whispering and giggling, then kissed as they stepped further into the house. The anger that surged within me was like nothing I'd felt before. Unable to hold back, I flicked on the lights, and they froze, eyes wide with shock. The room was suspended in silence, my sudden presence cutting through their laughter like a blade. The shock on their faces said it all. My wife stammered, trying to form words that never came. The driver stood still, caught between guilt and fear, his eyes darting between us. The betrayal that had simmered in my mind for weeks came to a full boil, and I felt a surge of anger that made my hands tremble. I couldn't bear to hear whatever excuse she was trying to form. There was nothing that could explain away what I had just witnessed. Without raising my voice, I pointed to the door and told them both to leave. My wife began to protest, her voice shaky as she tried to piece together a justification, but I cut her off with a simple, "Get out." The finality in my tone made it clear that there was no room for discussion. The driver mumbled an apology as he shuffled past me, avoiding eye contact. My wife hesitated, pleading with her eyes, but I stood firm, refusing to let the pain crack my resolve. As she walked out, I told her that she would hear from my lawyer soon and that she could expect divorce papers. The door closed behind them, and I was left in a house that now felt foreign, as if everything within its walls had been tainted. The hours that followed were a blur. I sat on the couch, the silence suffocating. Missed calls and messages from her began piling up on my phone, each notification like a jab to an already open wound. I couldn't bring myself to read or listen to any of them. The woman I thought I knew, the partner I trusted completely, had shattered the life we built together. The days following that night felt surreal. The house was empty, devoid of her laughter and the routines that once filled it. The silence was heavy but, in some way, cleansing. I moved through the motions, contacting my lawyer, informing close friends and family, and trying to explain the unexplainable to myself. The missed calls from her continued, each one more desperate than the last. Apologies, explanations, pleas, none of them mattered. I deleted them all without a second thought. Work became my sanctuary, a place where I could distract myself from the gnawing ache of betrayal. Friends offered their support, rallying around me to remind me that I didn't have to face this alone. Yet, late at night, when the house grew quiet and the weight of reality sank in, I struggled. Memories of our life together, the moments we built, would rise unbidden, only to dissolve into the bitter truth of what she had done. The divorce process moved quickly. There was no point in dragging things out when the trust had been obliterated. She signed the papers, perhaps realizing there was no path back. In our brief interactions, I could see regret etched on her face, but it was too late. The damage was irreversible. I packed up her belongings as promised, sending them away with a courier. The finality of it felt strange, both a loss and a relief. Life began to take on a new rhythm, one where I wasn't haunted by suspicions or waiting for the other shoe to drop. The pain didn't vanish overnight, but day by day, I started to reclaim my sense of self. Slowly, I began finding joy in simple things again, time spent with friends, walks that cleared my head, and rediscovering hobbies that had long been pushed aside. The chapter with her was over, but it taught me that healing doesn't mean erasing the past, it means learning from it and moving forward, stronger. To those who have been through something similar, know that rebuilding is possible. Life has its sharp, painful turns, but it continues, and so can you. Thank you for listening to my story. Your support means more than words can say. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe to my channel for more content.